I'm Elaine, and thank you so much for inviting me here this afternoon. We're going to have a pretty interactive, but not too interactive session. So I wanted you to know a little bit first about us, because we think it's really important we meet each other as people. So this is me. You'll see straight away I broke my leg 2 years ago, so if I'm hobbling around you'll understand why. I make a lot of cakes. I'm from the Highlands of Scotland. I have a beautiful cat that apparently caught a rabbit this morning when I wasn't at home. So this is just to orientate you around me and what I do and what's important to me. And I'd like to also introduce my new friend and colleague, Nicola.
Hi, good afternoon everybody. This is me. I do know some of you in the room. I live in North Cumbria, I live in Wigton, and up until the 31st of March my work was in North Cumbria, but I also work with colleagues in the North East, now cover the whole of the patch. And I absolutely love living in North Cumbria. I love going out on the fells and just enjoying the Lake District, and I'm passionate about making sure that our health services are right for all of us in this room, our friends, our families, and our colleagues, and it's great to be here, so thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. So, this is what we're going to be exploring and talking about today. We want to build on the work that Stephen shared with you last time and talk about the conditions for staff to flourish, and that, I guess, is all about role and responsibility. So there's 3 areas we're going to break this down into this afternoon, talking first of all about how you develop and sustain a continuous improvement culture, then talk a little bit more about how you create that environment that makes people feel safe, and then finally how you go about encouraging and unleashing curiosity and creativity. So that's what I'm planning to cover today, and we thought we'd start straight away with your own vision, where you are, and the fact that here you're describing that you want to build this new integrated health and care system. And there were a couple of things when I looked at this online that jumped out to me straight away. Firstly, it was the word integrated. I think there's hardly anything that we do now that can't be integrated in one way across the system, and we have to think like that. Historically, we've grown up and trained often in silos, but now the important thing is for us to work very differently together. And that working together is collective. So we're going to explore that again a little bit more this afternoon, about how you can seed power and actually get more than the sum of the parts if you work very closely together as a whole system. So we'll start with your vision, and we'll move on then to how you go about developing this culture of continuous improvement. So Stephen might have touched on some of this already, but I'm not going to be talking this time about the tools and techniques. It's more about the culture and the way we apply some of this in our everyday work. So the thing about continuous improvement, I have to warn you, it never ends. Once you're on that path, you will never not look at things in a different way. So it is continually striving for perfection. You might hear us using language which is Japanese occasionally. We sometimes lapse into it if we're lean practitioners, as I am, and the word Kaizen means continuously and improve. So it's quite simple, but you'll often hear people talking about Kaizen events or Kaizen thinking, and that's simply what it means, nothing more than that. And the continuous improvement technique is actually improving efficiency of the processes that we look at. It's about taking out waste. And I often think about it as having waste glasses. And once people have put on those waste glasses, it's very, very difficult for you to think in every way. And you need to think about it as adding value to the people that are going through your processes or part of your processes or receiving services on your behalf. So those are things we're going to touch on. But as ever, the first thing that people often say to me when we mention lean or we start talking about lean in healthcare is, hang on Elaine, that's all about cars, it's all about industry, you can't apply this to healthcare, we're not robots. Okay, so I hear that quite a lot, and I agree, that's quite true. But this did come from industry, this mindset, and it has been over the years adapted and used in almost any setting. So this is a photo of the car plant in Sunderland I had a chance to go and visit. And yes, it's fantastic. You could see the whizzing robots, you could see the sparks flying. It was all really very exciting. But actually the important bit was the way the staff were interacting with each other. And the fact that they were adding value to the whole process of making a car. The robots were getting it right every time. They were doing the same thing. They could do it within micro millimeters of accuracy in a way that as humans we couldn't. So I'm going to come back to that idea, but there was one thing I did want to share with you when I was in Sunderland, is the cars move along the track quite slowly, but they move along. And the workers who are doing quite specialist work move from one place to the other. And I saw a guy putting a bolt in and dropping a spanner. And he simply had a belt with spanners on, and he pulled out his second one, didn't miss a beat, and carried on. And you thought, that was quite impressive. But what was more impressive was the chap working on the car ahead. As he came back past him, he picked the spanner up from the floor and he put it back into his mate's packet. And I thought, wow, that was balletic. You could see them doing it without thinking. He didn't ask him to pick it up. He didn't need to be told to pick it up, to keep the line moving. They just carried on. So that thinking, widely thinking as a team, is something that we do, but do we do it enough? So just thinking differently. There are things we can definitely learn, and here teams in my hospital, as it was there, talking about Amy on the left here, talking about the work that they're doing, and we'll come back a little bit to that. But as I've said, we're not here to talk about tools and techniques. I'm happy to talk to any of you about tools and techniques as much as you like, but the fantastic Clip team have all of those at your fingertips. There are plenty of training and opportunities here in Cumbria for you to learn more about it. And one of the things I would emphasise is, whatever your role is, you do need to understand some of this, and you do need to at least use some of the tools and the techniques, because that's what becomes familiar. It's no good reading it in a book. This is all about practicing and actually getting your hands dirty. So sometimes people think, actually, it's great, we like it, we get it, we think it's a good idea, but do you know what, I'm a bit busy to do it. Don't quite have time to do it. And that's actually, it's the nice stuff over there. Maybe it's the puppies and the kittens that we'll get round to eventually, but we're a bit busy doing it. Does that resonate for anybody? Well, you're being far too polite, but I know that's how it is. Sometimes you think, okay, quality improvement, yeah, I know we need to do it, but I'll get round to it when I've done the proper work. So I want to convince you, if I can today, that actually quality improvement is the real work. If you can apply this to your day job, actually, it will become easier for you. So it is a rigorous application of method. It's not puppies and kittens. It is actually doing really hard edge, focus, clarity of purpose, scientific and measurable approaches for the processes that you're responsible for or you're running. And having the confidence to have those results visible for people so they can actually see what's going on and you can see what's going on. And that takes a bit of bravery. That allows you to know what happened yesterday and stop it, if you possibly can, happening tomorrow. And that was what was happening on that production line. People were realising where things went wrong and they were immediately doing something about it. So I hope I'm persuading you that actually this isn't puppies and kittens, this is hard edge work, this is real scientific engagement, this is stuff that you can practice, but actually you need to really understand the methodology and use that on a day-to-day basis. Because we waste a lot in healthcare, and that is no different, I'm afraid, in social care either. Wherever you work, there will be an element of waste in the system. And although this data is old, 2012, actually we would now say it's much higher than that. People are wasting time in healthcare. And if you've been a patient or you've taken a loved one into any of our services, you will know how that feels. Because waste is actually when it's time that you're not spending having added value to you. So if somebody invites you into a clinic, for example, and you have to wait an hour, you'll be very patient and you'll wait because you want to see whoever it is that you're coming to see. But is that adding value for you? So we're quite used to hanging around actually and waiting for people to see us and do things. It's almost part of our culture, and we're quite almost arrogant in healthcare that says, well, you know, you need it sorting, you know, you have to wait for it, but actually is that the right way to think about it? I'm being clearly, deliberately provocative to make you think about this from a different perspective. And one of the ways we look at waste in Lean is to say, would you pay for that? Would you be prepared, if you were paying for it, to sit for that hour waiting for somebody? Or would you be asking the question about why haven't they organised their systems better for you to not have to wait? So let's just look briefly then at the sorts of waste that there are. Now this, again, you may have seen a waste wheel like this. And I'm just trying to, again, orientate you around some of the ways we do waste. When we're wasting people's time, it also burns them out. And there can be nothing more important at the moment than our staff's health and well-being. So if you're having to continually go and find something or wander back and forwards because whatever it was you expected to be there isn't there, that's wasteful of your time, but it's also wasteful of your energy. So what we find is that actually some of the leanest organisations look very calm. Everything is in its place. Nobody has to worry about running out of anything. It's having a calmness where people know and can expect everybody to do everything all of the time for each other. So, here are a few examples you've seen and heard, and I'm sure you can think of some now. If you have lean glasses, you can't not think this. So whether it's have you got the things organised in your kitchen cupboard the right way, or as I most recently sat in Quick Fit waiting for a tyre, I was appalled to see that they rolled all of the tyres off of the lorry on the other side of the forecourt and then had to roll them all into Quick Fit while I sat there shouting almost silently, "Why didn't you move the lorry closer?" It seemed so obvious, but that was obviously the way they'd always done it. Now there may have been a very obvious reason, not to me, why they did it like that, but I bet not. And how many times have you done something because that's just the way we always do it here? Not questioned, not thought about it. Your staff, your teams, your colleagues are often doing that. They're too busy to think about how to change it. They just know that's how we've always done it. It's irritating, but it's quicker to go and do it myself than think about how I'm going to change it. So these are tricky things to change. And one of the things we do when we're preparing a team to run an event or look closely at their own process is to put up one of these wheels in the place where the work happens. And here's the respiratory team in Ireland, and you can see up in the top left a hand-drawn waste wheel where we ask the teams to have a look and see, tell us what annoys you or what could you change, what do you think could be different here, and then we try to put those into categories. You can see somebody was so inspired they managed to write 3 pages of A4 for you, tell me exactly what they thought about the processes in their department. So don't be frightened, and that is one of the things as leaders we sometimes find we don't ask because they might just tell us, and then what are we going to do? How do we start? But my advice to you there would be start anywhere. Start with something. Start with something they think is important. And if you have a huge wheel here of lots of things you could change, what's going to have the biggest impact? And how will people really feel like they've made a difference? For the staff, if they come up with ideas, and then they can try them out, and they can make the changes, it's liberating. So then you start to unleash that creativity, if you're giving permission for them to do that. What you're asking them to do, though, is not reorganise everything. These are small cycles of change. These are experiments that you're asking people to do, because they know better than you do how their system works. And this happy smiling team on the respiratory department actually grabbed hold of this concept and totally ran with it. They found that they were wasting time doing tasks that were just not necessary. Some of those could be moved to the night. Some of those were not adding any value to the patient whatsoever. And when we asked them, what is it you want to do that would add value to the patients? In this case, the staff said, we want to spend more time educating staff about the way to use their inhalers or the way they manage their own respiratory disease at home. And we want to do that if we can with their families. Because often the patient was so bewildered that they simply didn't remember everything. And what's really interesting for me, looking back at this photo, is that one of the healthcare assistants actually decided, her own experiment, to test how much time she was spending on some of these unnecessary tasks. So she had a little clicker clock on her pocket where she was actually measuring for a day, because we need data, the hard edge bit I was talking about. She was measuring how many times a day she was doing a particular thing, how much time she wasted, or she was doing something else. She collected that data. Now just let me pause there and ask you to think how it would be if management came along with some little clickers and said, we're going to measure now how much you do and when you do it, we want you to click. There would be a riot, would there not? Absolute riot. Quite rightly so. But because the staff were thinking about that, because the staff were curious about how long were they spending doing this, that's okay. So there are some advantages to having those grassroots up, and the real skill is trying to work with what they want to do and what they see as important for them and their patients and their clients with what the organisation is trying to do. We call that a golden thread running right through the organisation. So the big objectives, and in this case it was to reduce the length of stay for patients in the hospitals, tied right back into the work that the teams were doing. And on the wall behind them you can see there's a ward they huddled every single week where they shared the experience of their own experiments, where they collected data over time. And they looked at what they were doing from a patient's perspective as well as from their own staff's perspective. And they had people working alongside them, like our finance team and our data analysts, who helped them put it into graphs, actually started to measure and show data over time, but could even start to put a price to everything that they were doing. So if you went onto this ward, these were the most knowledgeable people about what was happening in respiratory. It wasn't the divisional manager, it was actually the people at the front line. The data was there on the wall for everybody to see, including the patients and including the visitors. So it's an interesting approach to engage people that way. And in fact, I used to go on a weekly basis to Amy's team and see the work that they were doing. I do remember going unexpectedly to her huddle, as we call them, once, and Amy going, oh, I didn't know you were coming. And I thought, oh, okay, what's happening here? And she said, right, well, we're going to report out on something that we know we shouldn't have done, Elaine. We know we shouldn't have done, but just going to do it and we're going to report out how it went. So what they'd chosen to do was they had a hunch, and that's where a lot of these experiments come from. They had a hunch that if they kept a bed for one of their respiratory patients, when they discharged them, actually they might not have to come back in. So if the patient was confident there was going to be a bed, if they were in a crisis or the family went into meltdown, they would take more risk and discharge them earlier. That was their hunch. So they broke every rule in our hospital by hiding a few respiratory beds. I happen to tell you that straight away. And they said, no, we shouldn't have done it. But you'll never guess what happened. And you know the end to the story. Clearly, the patients actually were really confident that they could go at a moment's notice if they had to back to their bed. And hardly any of them needed it. Now, would we have known that? Was that scientific? Were they trusting their own intuition and their local experience? Of course they were. But they did break the rules. So, I'll leave you to ponder that one. When would you let people break the rules? When would you encourage people to think out of the box and have a go? And would you let them do that if they were just making random assumptions? Or would you require them to collect the data and show the outcome of the experiment? Because it might not have worked. It's not just one thing we're asking them to do. We're asking them to look more carefully. Because I'm afraid we're really good at firefighting. This is Kim Barnas, one of the three people I was going to touch on for today. Kim's a friend of mine who works, I was one of the leaders in theatre care in Wisconsin, North America, and ran her whole organisation along with her partner there, John Tucson, in a lean way. And the way they did that was to encourage staff to look at data, encourage staff to work together, encourage staff to take risks and continually look for how things might be done better. But in her book, Beyond Heroes, she does describe that actually we train people in our organisations to be really good firefighters. And I hold my hands up, I was one of those. Absolutely. I loved a good crisis. There is nothing like a good crisis. I know we're all a bit crisis out at the moment, but we love a good crisis, particularly in the health system, but it's not dissimilar in social care either, where managers go in, cape on, ready to do that superhero work. And if I'm honest, I used to feel good about doing that. I used to get that instant gratification, that buzz that you got from solving a problem, from sorting something out, from making it better, everybody going fantastic. Until one day, walking through A&E in a big hospital, I walked past one of my pals who happened to be a consultant in that department, and he said, "Oh God, it must be bad you're down here." And you thought, "Oh, that's interesting." What that's saying is they only see me if there's a crisis. What that's saying is they're expecting me to come and help them with the crisis. That's me actually making them helpless because they're all stood there waiting for me to come and tell them how to do it. That was a bit of a wake-up call for me. Can any of you think of times where you might have jumped into heroic mode? I can't be the only one in the room, surely. It's not just me. So that mindset of wanting to go, wanting to sort it out, wanting to do things, is why we came into the business up to the point. You know, we feel like that, we want to go and make a difference. But we also need to give people the opportunity to be able to solve their own problems, to be able to take their own decisions, to be able to not do today what they did yesterday, to actually continually improve and build and learn from what happened before. And Becoming the Change, the book on the right-hand side there with John Tucson and Kim's written together, talks a lot about what we need to do, how we need to behave. Because we've got into the roles that we've got into because often we've been quite good at firefighting. We've been quite good at crisis management. We're actually really good at telling people what to do. That's what it says in the job description. It rarely says on the job description, actually, you need to be able to encourage, empower, and seed power to those frontline staff. So what I'm looking for us to try and do is to tie this into a whole system. So this is a quality management system, and I don't know if Stephen touched on this last time, but this is how you start to tie everything back so that people have the clarity of purpose. People understand the variation in their systems, they know what's happening, they really can measure it, they know what happened yesterday. Your role is to support people to make those experiments, to try and make some of those changes and to test those changes in a safe way. So you can see around the outside of this circle now, it's all about relationships. And it's about knowing people rather than it being transactional and task focused. It genuinely is about working together in a co-produced way. And it's about trying to design what the systems are for the future together. And I would clearly argue that needs to be together with our customers, our patients, our clients, as well as our staff. So, let's move on then to the second part that I wanted to cover. And this is maybe more of the exciting bit, which is about how you develop a environment for change, working quite differently then than we do at the moment. And the first thing is people need to feel safe to do things. What I know is there have been times in my career when I've just not wanted to say anything, where I've seen it's wrong, never clinically, clearly. We would all shout out, that's our professional responsibility, but where you've seen things and you thought, really? But we don't shout out. Now, why is that? Why don't people take what they might feel are risks? It's because often they don't feel psychologically safe. So we're going to touch a little bit about that. We're going to talk about how you need to model the positive leadership behaviours that you need, and we're going to look a little bit about how you support teams to change a process once they've understood it. So for me, front and foremost is that psychological safety. Actually saying to people, it's okay, tell us what you really think. It's not a stupid idea. It's not yes but, it's yes and I'm interested. So we want people to create as many ideas as they can, rather than to be closed down, shut up, feel like they've been humiliated. And you can do that in very many ways, and it will happen to you. Somebody can close you down by just speaking over you. Somebody can ignore what you're saying over there because somebody more interesting is saying something over here. It's very subtle sometimes, this feel of psychological safety. So I'd encourage you to try and create an environment where people felt safe to say what they think. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to be quite clear that actually you don't know the answers. You are genuinely wanting to know what people are doing, what they're saying, and what they think. So that's a bit of you exposing yourself, I guess. So once you've got them in a safe space, how are you actually going to get them to do stuff? And that's what we want. We want to see them doing lots of things. Now, this is Simon Sinek's work that you may already be familiar with, but the important thing for me here to really engage hearts and minds is getting people to know what it is they're doing, which they do. So we can often talk about what you do. If I asked you about your organisation or your department, you could tell me straight away what it is you do. You could even really give me a good stab at how you do it. So those two things we almost immediately describe. But if I asked you why you do it, maybe not quite so difficult in health and social care to give an example of why you do it, but really explaining why we do it. That's why we get out of our beds every day. That's why people have put their lives on the line during COVID. So we need to reconnect with people about what it is that makes you do this every day. And then get up and come back and do it the next day. So Simon Sinek's work is really interesting, it's very impactful, and it's the sort of thing that people really remember why you're here to do something. And if you go off track, you need a touchstone for people to actually re-look at why it is that you're doing something. And this is your touchstone again. This is what we would call your true north. This is what your teams will be looking at and saying, okay, we are here to work together to ensure that the people start well, live well, and age well in North Cumbria. That's why we're here. And when you get into a battle, when you get into an argument, are we both doing this for this reason? Nicola's just going to do a little test for you.
I'm going to invite you to do a little bit of an experiment. So if you're willing, and this is very safe, if you just close your eyes, so if you close your eyes now, I'm going to ask you to point to where you think north is. So I'm on a compass in this room, so you close your eyes, and where do you think north is? Okay, so keep pointing where you think, and open your eyes and just look at where everyone thinks north is. So we've got a bit of a variety here, so we've got it all over the place actually, when we look at it. So we've got quite a few over here. We've got Nick going in that direction. We've got some over here. So thank you, put your hands down now. So where north really is when you do this, someone always says, I really want to know where it is, north. We've got the compass out before my phone. It is actually just pointing in this direction here. So it was going off in the wrong direction there. But the point of that exercise is just thinking that at work, if you're a leader or you're leading a team, and we say, we're going ahead, that's where our true north is, we've got a goal, we've got a vision, and actually you think everyone, either it's coming behind you or around you, but actually people are going off in different directions. I had that very thing happen to me yesterday, where I thought something was happening, and someone said, actually, I don't think the rest of the team think that, we maybe need to discuss that and all get on the same page. So I think we can all have a true north, but actually we need to check out with everybody where we think our north is and where we're heading.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, you're hopeless, aren't you, at knowing where the directions are. There you go. So let's just run through just a few more things then before we break for coffee this afternoon. So I think, again, Stephen mentioned to you last time about the work of Cotter, and I wanted just to share this with you because this was a bit of an aha moment for me when I suddenly realised that in order to organise and run a multi-million-pound organisation, be that a hospital trust or a local authority, you needed to have structure. You can't do it without structure. So that hierarchy on the left-hand side is actually something we've all come to know and love. You have to, if you started building something in your garage, you can do it for so long, but suddenly you need to have somebody who's more expert at something than you are, or you need somebody to now do the accounts for you, or so you can see how it grows, even if you're building something in your garage. So you end up quite quickly with a hierarchy. But if you're at the bottom of that triangle, what happens is it's really difficult to get any of your ideas to the top. And my goodness, we're really good at structuring, so it's going to take a bit of time. Whether that's you've got to go through the planning cycle, or you need to come up with a bid, or you've got to go to that subcommittee. And any of this familiar to any of you? Okay, so you've had a brilliant idea, you've woken up in the middle of the night, you thought, we could do this. By the time a year has gone past of you desperately writing those papers and taking them to people and, do you know what, you've almost forgotten what the idea was, and you probably think it was a rubbish idea anyway. So that's what happens in this hierarchy, unfortunately, for creativity. It's really good for making sure we can get reconciled accounts. Okay, it's good for all of the things that you need to keep the organisation safe. It's absolutely good for that. But what we want is to try and branch out to the right-hand side where it's appropriate. And that's where we have these little Kaizen bursts that I've described already, where you bring together people from different parts of the organisation to focus on a single goal. It might be a single problem, might be a single process, but these people on the right-hand side there are like the creative person in the garage that's got a brilliant idea or a problem to solve, and you go and get your pals who have the skills. So you don't have to go through a hierarchy. You go, actually, Nicola, I know you're really good at that. Will you come and help me? And Nicola just comes. Doesn't matter where she's working in the organisation, but because she's equally excited about it, she'll come and help. And so you form these cross-sectional groups that really aren't interested in hierarchy at all, to try and work together on a programme. And it's great when you're in an integrated system because people come with completely different perspectives. Often, you want the wildest perspective ever to come and give you some creative thoughts because we are quite biased and quite narrow in our thinking. So actually having somebody who thinks completely differently in that bubble is really helpful. But Cotter's brilliance was calling it a dual operating system or organisation where actually you tie what people are doing back to the organisation's objectives, to their true north, so they're clear about what they're doing, so they don't suddenly come up with an idea which is utterly off-piste, which isn't going in the same direction as the organisation. So there does need to be the link back. And that's why some of the people from the hierarchy need to be in the creative teams thinking about how to do things. Interestingly, people will often say we don't have time, we're too busy, we're absolutely caught up in this left-hand side, can't possibly do any of that right-hand side stuff, even though we know it's a good thing to do. But if you actually give people something they really feel passionate about, they're really excited about, I can guarantee you they'll find some time somehow. They'll do some of the other stuff that's boring really fast, because this one is really interesting. Some people will give their own time to do it. I'm not encouraging that, but I'm saying it's a way for people to really get engaged with the things that are exciting for them. Because that's what we want them to do. And Brene Brown here is the absolute queen of engagement, and if you haven't looked at her YouTube video or read her book Rising Strong, I think you're likely, if you're sat in this room today, to be pretty inspired by it. The important thing that Brene Brown is saying here is that people have to feel safe to fail. They can do lots of experiments, but some of those are not going to work, and that's okay. So we need to be encouraging people to try things. And I have to say, I felt really almost guilty at some of the time. My job was going around saying to people, on you go. That's what I did. And thought, how can I be earning this money to go around saying, on you go? But giving people permission was one of the vital things to encourage that creativity for people to actually try things out. But Brene Brown would say this as a core part of her research in her work, is that you need to give some of yourself to people. You need to show not just humility, that you don't know everything, but some vulnerability. And those are things, again, not often in the job descriptions, in my experience. But they're things that people recognise, they notice, they understand. You're not there as a leader saying, this is how you're going to do it. You're there as a leader saying, we've got this problem and I have no idea how to do it, you're the expert. Now, of course, there'll be some people that go, well, hang on, that's miles above my pay grade and you're getting paid this, why aren't you coming up with the ideas? Well, you're not coming up with the ideas because it's not your process. So having that conversation about what you do is equal as important for them as you actually say, how can I create the environment for you to be able to try things out? So vulnerability, humility helps you with the engagement. But you can't have people getting it right every time. A lot of the things they try will be wrong. You're there to celebrate the fact that they had a go. Not just that it worked, but that they had a go. Because this is just a link back to the IHI paper on leadership styles and mindsets, but having a mindset where actually you have to because you've been told to isn't nearly as powerful as a mindset for frontline staff where actually they were saying, I choose to do this. This is something I want to do. I choose to do it. I feel empowered by doing it. And just having the choice allows them to do things that we couldn't possibly imagine that they were going to do before. So this isn't unique to the UK. These are people from right across Europe that I've had the fun and privilege of working with over the last couple of years. So from Poland to the Netherlands to the south of England to Ireland, these are all teams and groups of staff that you can see have some things in common. One of them is that they're all, nearly all, standing in front of data, standing in front of places where they come together, where they look at information. Very visible, very obvious, provokes a conversation for them. And it's back to the rigour of the methodology. They want to collect information, they want to share it, they want to show what they've done. But the other thing that I really like about this slide is they all look pretty happy, don't they? So they're not just smiling for the camera, they're actually sometimes caught in mid-huddle with the camera and they're actually having a bit of fun. It feels like a shared endeavour rather than them as individuals. So, I've given you quite a lot of information in the last 3/4 of an hour. We're going to pause, but before we take a break, I'm interested in any of your reflections or any questions on things that I've talked about so far, and then we'll have a little break for coffee. So, anything that strikes anybody straight away? All going to be shy. Do speak.
I'm interested in your, obviously you've got perspective now on what you're doing, but obviously as in your previous role, in an executive role, in relation to psychological safety. Because I'm thinking about what do you do if you feel that you're very open and transparent and want to be honest, but you don't feel that you're in that environment where you can speak up? What do you do, or what can you do as a senior manager or in an executive team to, continue to create that? Because it's not enough just to say it, is it?
That's a great question, really great question. Really cuts to the nub of psychological safety. So there will always be somebody in your organisation that you trust. It won't necessarily be somebody in the structure or the hierarchy that you're sent to go and speak to. And I would encourage you to build an alliance and allegiance with those people. So start to find ways where you can find your voice and speak out. But don't put yourself at risk of harm. But when there's more than one of you, then actually it becomes important that you say what you think. So whether it's with colleagues or whether it's with your HR department or whether it's with your manager, this is how I feel is a very valid thing to say. This is how this conversation is making me feel. These are difficult things, difficult places, and sometimes difficult situations to deal with. And we have formal processes to go through. But actually being very open about how it makes you feel is the first step to saying quite loudly, I need some psychological safety here. Now that's quite a hard thing to do, but I'd encourage you to do that. And as a leader, you need to create that environment for people to be able to work like that. Thank you. Do come in.
Hey, I was wondering, when you've got staff, a large staff group that are used to having a command and control leadership style above them and have done for a long time, it's not enough just to tell people that actually we want different now when you give your permission. How do you go about making people feel as though they can walk through that open door? Super.
Another great question. It's really hard to change the culture, and sometimes, certainly I've found in more senior positions in organisations, you're caught between the culture above you and how it's done to you and the culture you want to create in the part of the organisation you're responsible for. So it's very easy to just have it done to you and then do it back, and that's the loop we often get caught in. So being intentional about your behaviour, about the way you think, and then practicing that. Now that's the hard thing, because you're being told to do it like this, and now I'm asking you to practice going to the place where work's happening. I'm asking you to go and say to people, this isn't, I don't know how this works, can you help me understand it? Can you tell me how it could be better? Instead of saying, I need you to improve it by this % by this time, I don't care how you do it, go and do it, because that will get me off the hook, whatever hook I'm on. And it's really an uncomfortable position being there, but you have to be what you want other people to be. You have to change the way you work, and you have to practice that, even if others aren't practicing it towards you. So I guess you're that sponge in the middle that's absorbing it, but working in a different way. And people will really notice. If you start working in a different way, they'll be curious about that. They'll think, he'll maybe forget that in a week. Okay, he's having a funny week, what's going on here? But if you're continually working like that, if you're genuinely inviting people in, if you are authentic in the way you're behaving, because you know it's the right way to do it, they're with you. They're with you. So practice what you want people to do, I would say. Any one last question before we have a break? Yes.
So here in North Cumbria, we've been looking at improvement for quite a number of years, and we're at a point again where we're revisiting, hence we're here today. So we're working in a much more integrated way, but we have real problems because we have fantastic staff improvements. There's some great examples, some of the work that's happening in the council, with the ICCs that we have, and we have really good strategies. So we can, but we don't get that golden thread. We might be able to say what the golden thread is, but we don't ever get it joined up so that actually we get the permission and we make it happen. So I just wondered if you had any advice on that.
Well, we had some very trying times in the Highlands, I have to say, over integrating health and social care. We were one of the first organisations to truly integrate health and social care, and when I look back on how we managed to do that, it was a relationship built on trust between some of those senior leaders who knew that what we were offering our population wasn't good enough. So I spent best part of probably at least 3, maybe 4 years sitting around the table at the council with my colleagues saying, it's your fault these patients are in my beds and you need to sort out the care packages and why aren't you organising your system? While he then shouted back at me at all the things I was doing wrong, and pointless, frankly. I mean, it absolutely was pointless, and we came to the conclusion we needed to share it and do it together. So having that touchstone of getting it right for the people of the Highlands, when we were shouting at each other, and sometimes it did get to that point, we would both then take a step back and go, is this helping the people of the Highlands, or actually is it just us trying to make sure it's not coming out of our budgets, which often it was coming down to whose money was it that was being spent. And we had to then take that bold step to say there was a different way to do it. Now, we were quite radical. We did change completely the model of care, and we did take social care workers, care at home workers into NHS employment, and we actually sent some community nurses, for example, to be employed by the council. So it was a big effort that we put in. But what we found was that people took their knowledge with them into the organisations that they were now working with. They were working much more closely with a focus on what was the right thing to do for either an older adult or for a child. But we thought that would solve it, but actually that didn't. Even that didn't, because the one thing we missed was the culture of the different organisations. It was truly powerful. It was completely different mindsets. And we thought we understood social care from health, arrogantly. And our colleagues in the council could easily run the NHS, there was no question about that, and that was obvious that they could do that. And that then became apparent when we had people working in teams, and they thought differently. There was different hierarchy, different structures. It took best part of a year before they came together and started creating, for the whole organisation, a new culture, which was genuinely integrated. So I would say it's a journey. I've said that already, and it sounds a bit glib, but actually it's a journey that people have to go on, holding on to what is that true north, what is it that we're here for, why are we doing this, and what's in it for the people that we're providing care for. And then it makes sense, and people are generally wanting to do the right thing, so thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts, or shall we break there? Does that seem like a natural pause for us to take a break and have a coffee? Would that be okay? Thank you very much. We'll take 15 minutes and we'll come back and we'll do the next session, if that's okay. So, we're back for the second session. You sound energised. I hope the biscuits up your sugar level a little bit. So, I'm hoping you were thoughtful rather than bored, so we'll see how the second session goes. But I'm going to hand over to Nicola now, who's going to take us through the next half an hour or so. But while she's talking, I want you to think about some of the things I was talking about earlier on and how those might have played out with the work and the approach that Nicola took to her local piece of work.
So I'm going to talk about how we have been addressing some warranted variation and health inequalities in maternity around particularly women from Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. I'm standing here not telling you that we've got all the answers or that we've completed that work, because that would be totally wrong. But it's actually where we've started and where we still need to go. So I'm just going to start with, prior to COVID-19, there was a body of evidence which was telling us through Embrace. I've just written some notes so I can remember what Embrace is, because I know what it is in my head, but it stands for Mothers and Babies Reducing Risk Through Audits and Confidential Inquiries in the UK. So Embrace looks at a whole range of data and information, and it was telling us before COVID-19 that Black women in this country were 5 times more likely to die than white women in pregnancy, Asian women 2 times more likely, and their babies were more likely to die. And you know, that's shocking, isn't it, in 2021, that we've got such inequity in the outcomes of pregnant women and babies in our country. And the implications for babies are that they're more likely to be born preterm, So I know I've got Lindsay in the room from maternity, so she can put me right with anything, but a pregnancy, you'd normally expect a pregnancy to last 40 weeks, and it might be in between 37 and 42, which would be acceptable. But before then, if babies are born earlier than 37 weeks, they're more likely to need additional feeding, they might need to go into special care, and they might have health problems from being born early. But actually the data, what Embrace is telling us is the difference between Black and Asian and minority ethnic women having babies and white women, it isn't just down to deprivation or where the mothers are born, or where which countries they come from, if they moved to the UK. It's something more than that, and we actually don't know what that is, and that's been evaluated, and there's research now. But some of it will be down to racism, and that has implications for us as a service nationally, but also locally. So the Chief Midwifery Officer wrote to us, to each local maternity system in the country in June last year, and said actually those differences between women who are from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background and white women were being exacerbated because of COVID. And we were given 4 actions. And one was around making sure that we increase support of those women who are at risk from those groups, making sure that, I'm just going to say, reach out and assure those women with tailored communications. We also knew that they needed to have the vitamin D, and that if there was insufficiency of vitamin D, that caused problems. And that wasn't just for pregnant women from those groups, it was also the wider population, but pregnant women could have an additional dose, and making sure we had to gather the correct data. So we were given these 4 actions in a letter, and we thought, okay, what are we going to do about it? So, as you know, Cumbria is an area of contrast, isn't it? It's beautiful. And those pictures, I've taken those out on my walks and runs, and it's beautiful, isn't it? But we know there's huge inequity. And we also know we've got real deprivation and rural isolation. But actually, what does that mean for those women from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background? So working with Multicultural Cumbria, they've told us that there's actually around the language barriers, there's risks about not having ability to travel, not understanding what the local authority systems are, what the NHS systems are, they've just moved here, etc., etc. So those are all the things that we've had to look at over the past year. So for those of you who aren't, don't do maternity as your day job, just thought it'd be helpful for you to know, we have approximately 2,800 births per year in North Cumbria. And women can choose to give birth at the Cumbrian Infirmary, at West Cumberland Hospital. We've got a beautiful birth centre at Penrith, or a home birth. So we had 2,800 women who we knew would give birth last year, and that was our cohort of the wider group of women that we were working with. So where did we start? So we decided we'd do a 2-phase approach. One was to make sure that we were supporting those women who were pregnant on the week that we got that letter, who were from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. And then a more phase 2 approach would be actually doing some co-production work with the MVP. So the MVP stands for Maternity Voices Partnerships. We've got one in West Cumbria and one in North Cumbria, and really strong engagement from service users with co-production. And they've helped us develop the work that we've done. So in June 2020, I'm really ashamed to say that we didn't have a clue how many women were from a Black, Asian, minority background who were pregnant in North Cumbria. And my question to you would be, do you know from the services that you provide either in the local authority or in health or the voluntary sector, how many of the women or patients that you work with or the service users are from that cohort? And out of those numbers, what is the difference of outcomes? So we didn't know. I also had a personal motivation, and one was Jackie Dunkley-Bent, the Chief Midwifery Officer, ran a national webinar after we got the letter with the 4 actions, and I heard 2 ladies speak who had given birth in the beginning of the pandemic, and one of them, she lived South West London. I don't know if it's my microphone in the noise. So. Thank you, that might help better. She lived in South West London, and she had a second baby at the start of the pandemic. And she was Asian, and she lived in a multicultural community, and she said, I gave birth in a beautiful midwifery-led unit, which sounded amazing, want to go visit it. And she'd given birth there before, but she said, I had to prepare to give birth in a white space. And I listened to her, I thought, and this was that on a national webinar, I thought, oh my God, a white space. You couldn't get a bigger white space in North Cumbria, could you? You know, geographically isolated from many of our communities and very white British. And then I thought, okay, so those women who are going to give birth here, who are from a black, Asian, minority ethnic background, how must they feel? And my second personal motivation, and I have permission to tell this story, is Lucy and Sabrina. And Lucy is my oldest daughter, she's 26, and her best friend Sabrina is Asian, and she's 26. And they met at secondary school in year 7. And they've gone through school together. They've got similar GCSE results, A-level results. Lucy's a management accountant for NCIC, and Sabrina's a social worker. So both, professional young women. But then if they were both pregnant today, how shocking that Sabrina would potentially have twice the worse outcomes for her and a baby than Lucy. And so that's, my personal motivation really, was listening to the lady about saying giving birth in a white space, what must that feel like, and for Lucy and Sabrina and all those other women who have potentially got worse outcomes here today. So where did we start? We did a data trawl, and on that day, on the 7th of July 2020, we had 2,389 women who were either pregnant or had given birth recently. And out of them, 88.5% were British, Irish or white of them. 2.6% were black, Asian or minority ethnic background, which is slightly higher than what the last data that we had. We'll get more robust data from the recent census, but the data we have, we look at about 1.5% population, but our pregnant women were 2.6%. And 8.9% had no ethnicity recorded, which actually, when you look at other areas and other parts of the country, that's quite a good score, as in there was no ethnicity filled in. You might go to other places and they might have 20% of ethnicity not recorded. I think I'll be happy one day when that's 0%, and I'm sure my colleagues in maternity will as well. So the question there was, why hadn't people recorded it? Was it because it was unknown that, of course, a woman doesn't have to declare their ethnicity? Or was it because our midwives didn't have the confidence to have the conversation with the women at booking to ask them what their ethnicity was, or was it just not filled in? So that was a question that we had to look at. And we decided at phase 1 we'd have some really tailored messages go out to the women who are pregnant from a black, Asian, minority ethnic background. And some of you may know we have an electronic patient record for maternity, which is called Badgenet. So it's quite easy to put tailored messages out, like push them out. I'm sure the person wants to send them out won't say it's particularly easy, but in my head it's easy. We could get the messages out. We also did lots of work with GPs, actually making sure that they had information as well out in the community. So we soon realised that we weren't going to be able to do this on our own. We couldn't just look at maternity. We had to look at our wider partners to make this work. What I tried to do was sort of thinking, well, I was reading in the news that from a health perspective, it wasn't just pregnant women from a black, Asian, minority ethnic background had worse outcomes. Because of COVID, it was the wider population. And I kept thinking, was there a group looking at this? But at that point, there wasn't. So we had a look at a range of partners that we could work with, and it was within the health and care system and beyond. And I'll just pick a few out. So the University of Cumbria were brilliant at having a look at embrace data and helping us with the research evaluation. and we worked with Cumbria County Council with some of the work that they were doing. Multicultural Cumbria have been absolutely amazing. They've helped us so much. Our Maternity Voices partners got involved in lots of online groups, so we were mixing cultures, we were having conversations with women. But interestingly, the chief exec of Multicultural Cumbria said to me, "Do you lot not talk to each other?" So I was knocking on her door about maternity, and then she said, "Oh, I had sexual health on the phone last week asking about for information, learning disabilities a week before, so we really do need to get connected." And I was really conscious of that, but how do we do that and make it really work? And then having conversations with the hospital chaplains. Who do you come across? What women do you talk to? And also talking to our partners in the North East and learning from them. So one of the populations in the North East in one area is a big Jewish population, and Jewish women tend to go into hospital to have their baby with a doula. So a doula is a woman who would go in and support them rather than a male partner being there. And of course with COVID, you weren't allowed to take anybody in with you. And from the Jewish population, we suddenly realised that there was an increase in babies being born before arrival, a BBA. If you use the term BBA in front of a midwife or a paramedic, they get really anxious because you don't want a baby to be born unexpectedly out of hospital. So there's an increase in BBAs. How can we work with the Jewish population? And we work with a whole range of voluntary organisations to really, really understand our population. So this is a picture of some work with some women who are refugees in West Cumbria. And our Maternity Voices Partnership actually went out and worked with another organisation who worked with those refugees. So I think it's like taking it a step back. We want to, probably what you were saying before, when you rush in and sort things out, actually it takes time, doesn't it? And because of a number of people self-isolated a couple of months ago, I had the privilege of going to meet some of the refugees, and I was given a task to do. I realised actually that task, we're probably 6 months away being able to do that task, but actually have to get the trust and build up that relationship with those women. But great work going on in West Cumbria with Groundwork Trust and the Maternity Voices Partnership. So this is my final slide here, but it's about moving beyond an action plan. You can have all the action plans in the world, but it's about bringing it to life, isn't it? So we're doing that in a number of ways. So it's about challenging mis and ethnicity data. So, for example, in the CCG, we might get reports around serious incidents, not just paternity, but wider health. And if the ethnicity data is missing, I'm saying to my colleague, send it back and actually ask them to complete the ethnicity field, even if it is not known. We've got to make sure that we have the data and start to understand what's happening here in North Cumbria. We're moving to a model of continuity of carer, where women will be cared by the same midwife or midwife team in antenatally, in labour and postnatally, and actually thinking what are the outcomes for those women who live in a 10% area of deprivation or from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. Regionally and nationally, we're now collecting data around women with type 1 diabetes who are offered continuous glucose monitoring, but actually we've added some additional fields in there and saying, actually, if those women are from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background, what is the outcomes for them? Another example is a Melodies for Mums programme. We've run that in the first place outside London to run that earlier in the year, first place to run it online. We actually had a look at the content with Multicultural Cumbria, and we only actually had one song sung in English in that programme. We used songs from all over the world, so hopefully that made it feel more inclusive to everybody who took part in that programme. This next slide Elaine chose, and I just love it. I love it because it feels like to do something like what we've done, you have to get everybody in the fold, don't you? It isn't just one person. You have to try and gather everybody in, and actually the sheep are all looking in different directions.
within our maternity work, all our partners have got, you know, slightly different goals, different visions, but actually, if we can bring everybody together, we can make a much bigger difference than working alone.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Nicola. I do think she deserves a round of applause. That's great. So we're just going to ask for just a couple of minutes reflection then, not just on the great story and the work that they've been doing, but some of the things we were talking about earlier on. And do they apply? What was it that Nicola did that embedded some of those behaviours? Because actually it came from a direct instruction, didn't it? It was all the things I told you not to do. Somebody from up there sat in a dark room and said, you are going to do these 4 things. Go and do them. Okay? Now, is that what happens to you quite often? I'm sure it is. That's what comes in, and it's another one on the pile. But was there anything that struck you about the way Nicola approached that instruction that was a bit different?
Grasping the current situation and making sure that you've got adequate data that proves where you are currently.
Absolutely. So really understanding that data based on real fact, and when you didn't have the fact, you had to go and find it, and being a bit shocked, and you said ashamed, you couldn't put your fingers on it straight away. So yeah, actually everything you do, building it on reality of actual hard data. What does that mean? Although somebody's written it over there, what does that mean here? That's the first thing. Anything else? Any other observations? Monica?
The passion and her own reason for wanting to make a change.
Great. So those personal stories, those were really the why you wanted to do it, Nicola, I would say. You took something that was a general blanket instruction and suddenly internalised that. And that's something you can do for your teams as well, help them make it their own. Yeah, we've been told we have to do it, but actually is there a deeper reason now why we need to do that? And you could see that was something, the 2 examples there were very passionate views about what she'd heard and how that must make people feel in this area. Any other thoughts? There's another,
Yeah, just thinking quite early on, I think, about that number of stakeholders and getting right down to the women themselves. And so it wasn't just about the professional's voice, it was about how that experience was for those people who were pregnant.
Absolutely. So really genuinely listening to what the customer, if I can use that term, wants, or what the people at the front line are hearing and seeing. And then finally, building on that, I think, did you pick up on that sense of community, that way you had to work across boundaries and barriers, which are still there? You could have done it in your office, Nicola. You could have just sent out another thing that said, and now you are all going to do this. But actually working together across the community, thinking how you might engage this. And for me, the really inspirational bit that came out of Nicola's story was then how you thought, well, that might just be in maternity services, but hey, that's going to be in other services as well. How can I do something, or kickstart at least something in other services? So good, I'm hoping that helps just tie it back. You can hear it at one level, where it's just a really interesting story about a great piece of work, fantastic. But I'm asking you now to think slightly differently about why people are doing things, and the way actually you can encourage people to think slightly differently from the, oh no, we've been given another instruction. Okay, let's move on to the last bit then that we wanted to talk about today, which is about unleashing this curiosity and creativity that I've kept coming back to for the whole afternoon. So I've talked quite a lot about giving permission to experiment, and we'll touch on that. And I've mentioned that this is hard work. Lots of things that you're going to try won't work. You won't find the data for it. You won't know what the answers are. So you're encouraging people to do a bit more. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then I want to have you think about how you might try some of this after today. Just one thing, not a lot, but just thinking a little bit differently. So let's start with the creativity. It's a quote here just talking about how people sometimes are called creative and they did what for them was absolutely blindingly obvious. And that's what a lot of your frontline staff and colleagues will be saying, because it's obvious to them. They're doing it every day. So trying to get them to unleash that, trying to get them to tell you is one of the most important things. But I want to go back to something I felt a little guilty about, and that was actually walking around my organisation, meeting people, talking to people, connecting people, and having a good time. And going home buzzing, feeling that was a great thing, it's been great today, but did I answer those 200 emails? Probably haven't done my job. Probably haven't, but you can't put a value on those connections that you've made. It's impossible to say how much benefit the frontline teams gained from you giving them permission to have a go at something. The fact that you were visible, and you remembered their name, and you remembered their kid was not well last month, making it feel personal is worth anything. They're not there just to pick up their salary at the end of the month. They're there to feel important. And that's what you can do. So I would say, ignore your 200 emails, or at least go through them very quickly and get rid of the 100 that were all rubbish, but spend some time actually really engaging with the front line and give people permission to have a go at things, be creative. But it's risky doing that, because actually it's quite safe sitting the other side of an email and sending it, pressing go. And I said to somebody who I'd asked to go and speak to the team at the front line whether she'd done that. She said yes, she had. Absolutely, she absolutely had done that. She sent an email just the day before yesterday. That for me is not going and connecting. Very easy to ignore those, very easy to delete those, and actually it's very obvious to me she doesn't really care about me if she's not bothered to come out to me, to the place where work's happening. So sometimes it's quite scary being there, but I'd encourage you to do that, and I'd encourage you to behave, and this might be one of the things you can practice, behave in a slightly, maybe different way than you would normally. And I'm saying practice because I never go to what we call the Gemba, the place where work happens, without a buddy. So if I went to the place where Nicola works, I would ask Nicola or one of the team to come with me as a buddy, so they could spend a minute afterwards reflecting with me on actually how I've behaved. Because these are some of the things that I'd want you to remember when you go to the place where work's happening. You are a guest in their workplace. You should have, and you'll remember this if you don't remember anything else, you should have really big ears, really big eyes, and a very small mouth. Because actually you're there to be curious about what's happening. Actually go and genuinely find out what's happening at the front line. You can be sense checking whether what you're hearing is happening is actually what's happening. There's lots of things you can do, but I, for example, was talking to a chief exec just yesterday and saying, you can tell when you go to a department how connected people are. If they never, ever use anybody's name, they're unlikely to ever have been there before. When I go into a place and somebody says, yes, who are you, to the chief executive who I'm with, that chief executive has never stepped in that department before, has not even got a profile in that organisation. So there's definitely something about being at the front line, being high profile, being accessible to people, which frontline staff really, really value. But there you go, to their wall. It could be anywhere, but here, if you're at this wall looking at this huddle where they're talking about the experiments that they're doing, you should not only listen and understand and comprehend what's going on, but you should add some value to that. So you're not there to tell them how to do it. You're there to listen to what they're doing, and you're there to ask questions, even if it's just help me understand that. But you're there to ask questions that increase their own learning. You are there as a coach. You're there to encourage them to think more deeply. And you'll know that moment when you ask the question and it goes quiet and you can see them thinking about it. You know that feeling where people are going, That's the moment to be quiet. To let them make those connections. Let them think about it in a different way. And let them question why they might need to come up with a slightly different solution. So I want you to be curious. I want you to not be telling them what you think, even though that's what you think your job description tells you that you should be doing, going out and telling them what to do. Let them come up with the ideas and celebrate with them all of the effort that they're putting in. So some of you might be prepared to try some of this next week. It's good fun. It's also a bit countercultural in some places. If you turn up and say, I've come to see what's going on, I'm just really interested, they'll go, oh, okay, what's the catch? What's going on here? So it's going to be something you have to keep going back and doing over and over again. And you want to encourage people because actually you need the time to do this. It takes time to do it. It takes time to release time for the staff to do some of this, and this was the last person I wanted to introduce you to today. This is Greg Orme. He's a very creative thinker. His book, The Human Edge, is well worth a read, and it's interesting for me because it's about how you're bringing artificial intelligence into some of our current situations. Now, we already touched on the robots in the car industry, but we're already using these bots, whether you're in the council or whether you're in healthcare. These things are happening. They're already starting. People are using systems to direct you, whether it's for even out-of-hours care or whether it's when your bins need picking up. There are things that you're going through without realising in the background. So we're quite familiar with the technology, but we're quite frightened of it. We're particularly anxious about it if it's going to take over people's job. And I remember trying to do a piece of work where we were looking at taking out the medical records. And if any of you have been to an outpatient department with medical records, you'll see there come in these huge volumes of papers in big cardboard cases that get pulled overnight by the teams ready to deliver for the doctors to look at those when you go to the clinic the next day. And we recognised that this was a hugely labour-intensive and not particularly helpful process that we had in place. So we were keen to automate that, to use a patient-focused record. And what we wanted to do was to talk to the teams about how we could do something instead of this. Now, what do you think was their first thought? Because these were people working at night, pulling records. What do you think when we told them we were looking to automate those jobs or do that with other technology?
You're looking for cost savings.
Say again?
Looking for cost savings.
Cost savings, I'm going to lose my job. So instantly. Because it's how it impacts on me straight away. Of course there would have been cost savings, but interestingly in Scotland we have a no compulsory redundancy clause, interestingly, so nobody can lose their job. So that's quite an interesting thing when you're looking at service improvement. There shouldn't be anything that we're doing that's a continuous improvement, a service improvement that results in somebody losing their livelihood, in my view. Because actually there's always plenty of things we can have people do. Now some people might choose to go, but in this example we were looking to see if we could do something differently. And the other people that really opposed it were the doctors that were using the records. We'll not have those, we can't find it, we need to have all of these. They're historically completely entrenched in the old way of working. So you have to push quite carefully but quite clearly through this to find out what the benefits are. And the real benefits to the patients were actually they had the most up-to-date information in front of them because it was now electronic. We knew from the studies that we did, because we collected data, that they rarely looked at anything that wasn't more than a few weeks old. And if they wanted the old records, we could pull those, but we didn't need to pull every one. And we also found that actually there were lots of things that weren't being done overnight where we could reallocate these tasks. The staff that held to the tasks that we really needed doing. So when you look for the win-win-win, now you can start to think quite creatively and the technology doesn't become quite so much of a threat. And we're using it already in healthcare. So these are just 3 healthcare examples, but I'll go back to the robot on the right here, and this is a pharmacy robot. So in a big acute hospital, most places now have pharmacies with robots in. And you might think, well, pharmacists would be very upset about that. Why on earth are they going to let robots come in and take over their jobs? Well, actually, the job that the robot can do much better than them is not just count pills, but put things in places where it's much easier and quicker for them to find. And guess what? They can do that 24/7. They never get tired and they don't actually take any holidays. Our pharmacists are in many places like hen's teeth. We can't get high quality pharmacists to be able to be there giving us the clinical advice that we need. So this is an obvious thing to do. What can we do though? We can use the technology to release the time for people to actually add more value to the patient experience or the work that they're doing. A couple of other examples here just on the left. This one at the bottom is using artificial intelligence to look at mammograms, breast x-rays, part of my own background and field, and we were appalled when we heard that actually they weren't going to be humans doing this. There were people that were saying, this is my life's work, this is all my training, my expertise, how can you possibly have a machine do it? But actually machines were better at pattern recognition. Now, it didn't mean you took the humans out of the process. Far from it. You could actually use the machines to do the straightforward stuff, the stuff that we did every single day, and use the humans where we really needed them on the really complex, intricate work that only humans could do. And finally up there is a picture of them in an operating theatre, and again this makes people's heart flutter when you think that a robot's going to do surgery. And of course it's not the robot doing the surgery, it is still the surgeon doing the surgery. But our big clunky hands sometimes are more difficult, and the surgery that the robot can do is much more sensitive, much more fine, and that robot controlled by the surgeon can give the patient better outcomes. So we've already got examples, and I'd encourage you to embrace them, to think about how to use these differently and unleash the time in the humans to do the bit only the humans can do. So 3 ways Greg Orme would tell you that you can use the humans now. Actually, we don't like doing routine, boring things. Even the guys on the line building the cars swap jobs on a weekly basis. They could do at least 5 different things on that line, and they kept changing them. And they could do them all at an expert level. If you had one person doing the same thing all the time, actually what happens, they get quite bored. They get a bit sloppy at doing it. So keep it interesting for people. We are much better at having those connections and most importantly practicing the empathy. So luckily technology doesn't yet have that creativity and curiosity, and we need to make sure that we can free up people so that they can engage really in a personal and a different way than anything that technology can bring to us. So I'm going to finish now with 3 or 4 examples just of things that creativity has been unleashed. And nothing of my planning. Maybe somebody heard me say on you go, and they did. So here's one where in the community we had at the very bottom of Loch Ness a really, not hugely remote by Highland standard, but pretty remote community that we were struggling. We've now taken over social care, as I described, and we were really struggling to be able to provide care at home for a number of clients down in that community. And one of our third sector colleagues came to us and said, do you know what, we could do this differently. If we could use the self-directed care money in a really different way, we might be able to do something, because Izzy on the right hand side here lived in Boleskine, the place where they were looking for people. She wanted to work in that area. She wanted to be a care worker, but actually she didn't want to travel and go away. So between us, we came up with an idea, came from them, where actually they would take the liability, the responsibility for the training, they would provide the cover, yet they would use a self-directed care resource to pay people in the local community to look after people in their own local community. Now, it might not sound like rocket science, but actually our systems didn't let them do that. We were so busy trying to provide it really badly over here, we didn't take the time to think about how we might, with a partner in the third sector, be able to break some of the rules we had that didn't happen to be a problem for them, to come up with something which is now still going. The Boleskine Community Care is a fantastic, innovative programme that the local community now own and run. The second one started from our staff asking for bikes to ride around the city of Inverness. It's you wouldn't think we had traffic jams in Inverness, but there was a problem with getting from one side of the river to the other. So we had a pretty straightforward, you'll have them here I'm sure, bike solutions where staff could use pool bikes and ride around instead of having to use their cars and not be able to park. So these were some of the staff at one of our day centres, and they invited me to go for the day, which was fantastic. I've never turned down a visit. Anybody invited me, I was always, yes please, I'm there. And they said, oh great, you'll be able to come today. We're taking the clients out on the trike. And I said, on a trike? Really? What are you doing exactly with the trike? And they said, no, we've got this fantastic thing. Here they are. They had taken the bike idea, they'd been talking to people about how much fun it was. Some of the visitors to the day centre said, well, we'd like to go out, we haven't been on a bike for years, we'd like to go out on a bike. They thought, not, well, you can't do that. They thought, can we get a trike? And with the help from Cycling Scotland and some European money, they actually did find a way to get a safe way to take people out, cycle them up and down the river in the middle of Inverness, which honestly, had they asked me, I probably would have told them all the reasons they couldn't have done it. But here they were, off. So great example of them taking something which was one idea and then building on that locally. And Katie Walter's just a local GP, absolutely empowering staff to have a go and making sure it was a safe thing for them to do. And the final one I'm going to share with you is around, again, a care home right up in the very northeast of Scotland, Goldsby, a care centre that we ran and supported. Very much part of the local community, but a separate place. So people didn't go there. Only the families were there. It felt very isolated in quite a tight-knit community. And again, you may have examples of this already, but the local manager decided that actually it was a bit quiet, and they knew, as it happened through their connections, the local teacher in the reception class of the school, and said, why don't we bring the kids in, and why don't we have them all in the place together? And they worked through all of the reasons I would have said, you have to be really careful and you can't possibly do that. They talked to the parents, they looked at the rules, they made sure they'd done risk assessment, you name it, they worked all through those, but they were determined because when they talked to the residents said, we'd like to do that. The residents wanted it, and it is their hope. So they were trying to do things that the local residents wanted. And it was a great outcome because they told me that as a result of this, one of the residents had not spoken for the best part of 3 months, and they were very worried about her. But once these children came in, they found that local resident with the child on her knee, and she was singing songs to them. And he thought, you could not put a price on that, nor could you have ever anticipated that was going to be one of the outcomes from this sort of piece of work. So I offer up those 3 suggestions to you just as examples of creativity. I know that you could give me hundreds back in return, but I want you to share those with each other. That's another maybe piece of your homework. Yes, at the conferences, yes, with each other, but telling stories about how people can be creative and can be supportive to do things is really important. And although Nicola didn't want me to share this story with you, we're going to finish on this one because this for me was a really great example when she accidentally told me about it and I found it online, about how you can take an idea and literally run with it. So Nicola, over to you.
A bit mortified. So it says I'm a running enthusiast, I am, but probably a bit of a plodder. So in 2017, nationally they put out tweets which were then circulated locally with the NHS saying, anybody got any ideas how we could celebrate the NHS 70th birthday next year, which was 2018. And people could like, have a coffee morning, invite people through our doors, which I think we probably do that every day, don't we? And I thought, I wonder if we could have a park run in Carlisle. Has anyone been to park run here before? Okay, yeah. So park run is a free event that takes place in a local community on a Saturday morning, 9 o'clock in England, but 9:30 in Scotland. And you can walk, run, jog, volunteer, or just watch. And I love it. I love it being part of a community. And I love going doing parkrun tourism, going into different parts of the UK doing parkrun. I've even done one abroad. I hope I might be able to do that again one day. So I wanted to share my enthusiasm for parkrun. I thought, if we're going to do it in Carlisle, why don't we do it across the country? So I said to Julie Clayton, who some of you'll know, our head of comms at the CCG in North Cumbria. I don't think she's ever forgiven me, or ever will forgive me, but I said, what about this idea? She goes, oh yeah. So we didn't actually ask permission, but we did feel that we were within the boundaries of what we were allowed to do. So we contacted NHS England nationally, we contacted Parkrun UK nationally, and explored the opportunity to do this, and they said yes. I'm not for 1 minute saying it was easy to do, because bringing 2 organisations together which have got really strong values was challenging, but actually we had the same outcome, that we would have a day in 2018 to celebrate the NHS 70th birthday and encourage people to give some activity, to actually think about how we might be more active and actually reduce the burden on the NHS. Thank you. So we started off by, I think it's about the January of that year, having Chris Poynton, who came to Cumbria. He was a husband of Kate Granger, some of you might know Kate's story about the Hello, My Name Is campaign. And Julie persuaded Chris, who wasn't a runner, to actually come and run with us in Carlisle. And we had a little bit of celebration there, and then planned the events to take place in the June. And we thought maybe 1 or 2 park runs in the country might get involved. And the idea was that we would go and have a bit of a party at Parkrun. And Parkrun UK decided that we would have a pre-launch event in Tonbridge in Kent So I was lucky enough to go. That's my sister Kate, who works with the CCG and who is a nurse, and Helen from Carlisle Park. And the gentleman is Ian Dodge, who is a national director for NHS England. And Dame Kelly Holmes came and helped us with that launch. So it's not often you can say you ran in a race with Dame Kelly Holmes. She ran the most backwards taking photos and stalking everybody. She was lovely. But what Tonbridge Parkrun did was just really whipped up enthusiasm to say, actually, we can do this. There was balloons, there was cakes, there was lots of people of different, different staff, from paramedics, nurses, and patients, of course. So we're all together. We had our event on, I can't remember the date in June, I forget, like about the 8th of June. And I can remember walking around Carlisle Parkrun in the morning, and you set up a park run, and actually some staff and park runners from Carlisle had actually gone to set our park run up really early in the morning, about 6:30, because they were going on to take part in an event at Gelt Gladiator. Some of you might know about Gelt Gladiator, it's a local event, but they really wanted to commit some time to make this happen. I can remember hearing a woodpecker in the trees, just like that noise of stillness before everybody arrived, and thinking, this is a bit weird because this is going on all over the country. And actually we had about 380 parkruns have NHS 70th events. We had 150,000 people take part. There was 14,000 new people who had never done a parkrun who actually turned up and did one across the country. And it was just amazing, but how our staff came together and made that a success. And we actually had a board at Carlisle Parkrun with little coloured notes, and you could write a thank you to the NHS. And I can remember reading one where someone had put, the NHS has saved my life many times, but Carlisle Parkrun makes it worth living. And it's that sense of being part of a community, isn't it? And actually thinking, we've got a little idea, people really buy into it, and actually we've made a big difference from North Cumbria, but across the country.
Well done.
Thanks, Nicola. That's truly inspiring, isn't it, to finish with? So this is just our summary. So I hope you can see from what we've talked about today that creativity and curiosity are really critical when you're trying to develop future services and new ways of thinking. I want you to create that right, safe environment for people so that the creativity and curiosity flourishes, which it's there, you just have to unearth it. And we keep going back to the connectivity. That's a really important element of all of the work that we do. So you need to think outside your box, have that shared vision so that people who share your values then will give that vision a voice. And finally, I'd encourage you to release the time to do the things that the humans do better than anything. That's making the connections and practicing empathy. So thank you very much. It's been really fun to be here this afternoon, and we're going to take any questions that you'd like to pose to us for the next half an hour or so. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Are you all freezing? Probably freezing. Any thoughts, any questions, any reflections, or anything you might like to share with us that you might be prepared to do from what you've heard this afternoon?
How would you start to approach breakthrough kind of change apathy, where I think continuous improvement through North Cumbria, because I've been around, been living this for a long time, but I think it's sometimes translated into you must improve everything at all times, and you end up with 100 action plans and they're not actually going anywhere. So bringing in, here's another change idea. How do you start breaking down that feeling of it's just another change, another improvement?
Yeah, a great question, because you can get to that point where it's just the thing that's done. So are you seeing any benefits from it? I'm hoping you saw some value in some of the stories that I was telling. And I've always felt that people really connect with stories. So actually that's what I would do. I would take them away from just being something that they have to do into telling a story about why it's important, and what actually happened, whether it worked or it didn't. Because I think we're also almost programmed to only talk about successful things. Lots of things would have happened. They would have had all sorts of problems to get that tribe going. But we don't talk about that, we just talk about the end bit. Now, that's great as a story, and it's, I hope, inspiring. It certainly was for me. But it's really hard to do it. So that improvement fatigue is the hard slog that you have to do to get to the stories that are the success. And that's what I'd encourage you to share. It's difficult, but it's important. And I think people, they want to be recognised for the work that they've done. So the more you can personally do that, the more you can say this is great effort, the more they're likely to reinvigorate themselves to have another go at something. Any other thoughts or questions? Anybody going to do anything differently? Go on, be brave.
Yeah, try and get out behind the computer more often and actually get out there.
I can say on you go to you then in that case and to give you permission to do that. I think you'd find it really, well, you know you'll find it good. You know you'll find it good. But it has to not be a royal visit, if you know what I mean. Because there's a little dance that we do, which is the royal visit dance, where, you know, I talk to a lot of the execs that I work with and they go, yeah, I've been out, I've done that. And you go, okay, so tell me what you learned. Tell me how you, and you could see they went, oh, I just went and said, oh, look, it's all marvellous and well done, and came away. Did they learn anything themselves? Did they encourage anybody else? Did they push it? Oh, no. That's a different thing. So there's something about the intentionality of going. So when you're going, go with purpose and reflect on what you learned as well as who you supported. So good luck, enjoy. Anybody else going to try anything?
Can I say something?
Of course, yeah.
I was just thinking with the trank story, you know, you actually, like you said, your staff had said, I'm going to do this. You think, oh, but it was actually like looking at it from the patient perspective, isn't it? You know, those patients or those service users wanted to go up the bank, and actually it's bringing it back to, I think with the work around the women with Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds is actually, you know, even going further and thinking about actually what would make a difference to them, and actually getting from a patient's perspective and then using that as a driver for making the change.
And genuinely finding out what matters to them. You may have heard that movement, what matters to you, rather than what's the matter with you. So that what matters to you is a really powerful question to ask people to think about what they might really want. And when you ask them, they will tell you. So, okay, I think if I've exhausted you all, thank you very much again for having us. We've had fun this afternoon. Yeah, thank you very much. We'll pass back to you.
So can I just say once again, thank you ever so much.